All right, we're live. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Networking Podcast. Here today, we're going to be talking about NVIDIA and their quest for world domination via acquiring smaller companies.
Yep.
So
they've been on a bit of a buying spree in the last few years.
Yeah, and honestly, this year in particular, I mean, the three main acquisitions we're going to be talking about all were announced and closed or are in the process of closing this year. So
really? Oh, I didn't know that. I thought Mellanox was a long time ago.
March 2020. It's because of COVID.
That's when it closed. Okay. When was the purchase announced? 2019?
Oh, that's a good question. It was late 2019. 18? But there was also rumors of Intel acquiring Mellanox around about the same time. So
yeah, that's true.
It was just the rumor mill, you know?
I wonder if it was a bidding war that happened.
I think there was. And NVIDIA came over the top too. They paid a pretty decent premium. What was really interesting, actually, before we dive in, let's set ourselves an agenda first. So I guess the important ones we're going to be talking about are NVIDIA plus Mellanox. That was the most, not the most recent, but the oldest one we're going to be talking about. NVIDIA plus Cumulus, which happened around the middle of this year. And the most recent one, of course, that's kind of hitting the press live is NVIDIA plus ARM. There's a bunch of good information floating around that, being ARM kind of addresses a wider market. Most of the market didn't really care about NVIDIA acquiring Mellanox, it seems. It was pretty hard to dig up information on that one. But the
also
ARM
it's very
one,
networking focused, right? Like Mellanox and Cumulus are networking focused, which as exciting as that may be to us, maybe less exciting to others. Whereas ARM is a much bigger deal.
True.
I think. So anyway,
all right, so let's take it from the top. Let's talk about NVIDIA plus Mellanox. So I think the acquisition closed in around March, April this year. We're just going to lay out some info about the acquisition before we discuss it. $6.9 billion, almost $7 billion. I think it was about 2.5x revenue or something. I need to go look that up. And it was all cash too. NVIDIA decided to pay all cash. They had about 7.5, almost 8 billion cash on hand, and they decided that they were draining the coffins. Cash. Seriously, right? That shows some trust.
It's a ballsy move. You got to be pretty sure you'll make that back. But I guess it would also know what revenue and like they'd be getting out of Mellanox and what they expected for the next year anyway. So I assume there was a purchase and then with a lot of
smarter
cash,
people
knowing
than
what
us
was coming
are making these decisions. I would like to think
above my pay grade. Definitely above my pay grade.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit of a history about Mellanox, like how they kind of built up their portfolio, so to speak. Now, obviously, we all know Mellanox, or at least I think we do, for their work on in InfiniBand and Fiber Channel, and obviously their ConnectX line of NICs. I know you and me in particular, we spend a decent amount of time working with ConnectX NICs and Spectrum chips and things of that nature. So I guess we can start there. But basically, we're going to be mainly focused on the data center chips. I don't have a storage background. I don't think you have a storage background. So we're going to focus mainly on the Ethernet. And maybe that makes us unqualified to talk about Mellanox. It actually might.
Probably does.
But that's okay. That's okay. We're going to do our best. You guys can bear with us. So it looks like Mellanox a long time ago. I think this was back in 2012. They actually, was it earlier than that? It was earlier than that. It was 2011, I want to say. So they had
let's just pause here. First of all, I feel like you've done a lot of research on this, and I've done absolutely zero. Like you're just talking about all these dates, all this money.
Yeah, the professor is in.
You've clearly gone and actually researched before we started talking, and I have not. So go ahead, continue and educate me because.
Absolutely.
And educate the people who are listening.
So they kind of delved into the Ethernet ASIC space starting in 2011. There was an acquisition they made in 2010 of Voltaire, and that was their first ever 10 gig switch, as far as I could tell. They also got some InfiniBand technology and some patents and stuff through that acquisition, which I guess doubled down their investment outside of kind of the network adapter space. They used to have a chip. It was actually really interesting. They used to have a chip called Switch X, and I must say, I got to give Mellanox kudos for the way they name things. Like the
X factor.
There's the ConnectX. There's the Switch X. They also have LinkX, which is their transceiver. I mean, kudos Mellanox. That's some clever naming. But they had a switch chip which was an InfiniBand and an Ethernet chip in one, and there was all these claims that one chip wasn't going to impact the other.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, now this is too old for us to go and validate these claims, but they were really focused on, of course, low port-to-port throughput. That was kind of their main thing, and focusing on this whole like lossless world of storage that we were all getting into around that time. So they had the initial SwitchX chip. I'm just going to rattle off some numbers here since I collected and wrote them down anyway.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah. So it was done on TSMC's 40 nanometer process. I think all of Mellanox's stuff is fabbed on TSMC. Done 10 plus 40 gig interfaces. Of course, it done 56 gig InfiniBand interfaces. What else is in my notes here? Pretty low latency, like 170 to 220 nanoseconds port to port, which is it's pretty impressive even by today's standards. So that was kind of the first SwitchX. They then announced a SwitchX 2. That was about a year later, as far as I can tell from the very, very quick searching I did before this. And again, doubling down on having a single chip for both InfiniBand and for Ethernet. The problem was they also brought in a fiber channel at this time, and it increased latency. Now, I didn't find that on their spec sheets or anything. They claimed port-to-port latency was still the same. So again, can't validate this, but there were some kind of anecdotal evidence that was not the case, and really the port-to-port latency went above when they brought out SwitchX 2 in October of 2012.
All right.
So what they did is they kind of axed that whole keep two ASICs together, or one ASIC that does two things together, and they branched it. And this is where I think your knowledge is going to come back in, and that they released their Spectrum line of chips, right?
Okay.
Spectrum, of course, mainly focused on Ethernet. So the first chip came to market around the middle of 2015. 28 nanometer TSMC, 3.2 tera, 64 by 50 gig, 32 by 100. Built on 25 gig NRZ modulated SerDes, almost 5 billion packets per second. And the interesting part, this was in a 135 watt package. At that time, that's a decent chip. And they were really trying, I think, to go head to head with Tomahawk. That's kind of, if we're trying to, I like to do it anyway. I like to compare chips with their respective categories.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, you kind of have to some extent. I mean, that was the market, right? That was the competition at the time.
Yep. So they released this in June 2015. They then released a iteration on this, Spectrum 2, which is their currently shipping chip. They have actually announced Spectrum 3, and so that's next. But anyway, Spectrum 2, July 2017, they moved to a TSMC 16 nanometer fab, and it was pretty much a 2x increase in both packets per second, just raw throughput. It was predominantly, like, most of that came from moving to 50 gig PAM4. So it was change in modulation on the SerDes that really drove a lot of that, and the chip being faster, of course. Then in earlier this year, I think it was like end of first quarter this year, they announced Spectrum 3. Now, the interesting part for me, as I was like researching this, and I want to get your thoughts on this, it's on the same fab. It's on 16 nanometer TSMC.
Are they still using TSMC? And by the way, is NVIDIA using TSMC? I mean, NVIDIA, let's say, not the Mellanox arm of NVIDIA. Are they using TSMC?
Yeah, so yes and no is the answer to that. They certainly don't own their own fab, right? They're a fabless operator, just like AMD. But there was rumors that they were going to be doing their Ampere line of graphics cards, which is the current 3000 series that we know and love as of like a week ago.
Samsung?
With Samsung, exactly, on 8 nanometer.
And did they?
They did.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So they had said, like, I found a comment from NVIDIA that the kind of the consumer grade GPUs are going to be on 8 nanometer. They're going to take that same architecture and do it on TSMC 7 nanometer. I don't know if that was later, but it was going to be more for the professional grade GPUs.
Okay.
So
but their networking stuff, at least their Mellanox stuff, is on TSMC.
It's all on TSMC. Yeah. TSMC owns the world. I did a little bit of research on them for this podcast.
No, it's crazy. Yeah, I know.
They own like 52% of like foundry production globally.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I think by the way, Samsung's like 20% or something.
What's NVIDIA's plan with Mellanox with regards to selling to other parties? Are they like, I mean, if I'm a ODM, can I go and select Mellanox these days and make myself a nice little Mellanox based switch to sell, or
As far as I can tell, yes. They are still planning on being like I want
like
you to refer that
they
like
haven't
a
announced they're going to axe
wholesaler
the
of chips.
business. Yeah, they haven't announced to
Indeed.
axe that business, right? Okay.
Yeah, and we'll see throughout the next acquisitions we'll talk about. They've kind of at least on paper said that's what's going to happen, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
the ARM acquisition in particular, I think is pretty relevant for this. But yeah, so that's kind of the lay low of Mellanox. Now, if we start to get into speculation time, because obviously we don't exactly know the motivation, so we
Yeah.
could speculate, of course. I was trying to figure out if there were any like obvious synergies between kind of like we know Nvidia is going after the data center market, right? In fact, they already have. I think earlier this year, for the first time, their data center revenue actually beat their revenue from gaming related
Yeah.
GPUs and things of that nature.
I
So
remember reading that. Yep.
yeah, and they're like they're kind of positioning themselves as the AI company of the world. I did read
Yep.
some really interesting statistics on this. Apparently, NVIDIA GPUs power 97% of AI workloads today.
That's crazy. Eh?
97%. Like I mean,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
monopoly if you've ever seen one, right?
Yeah. It's crazy.
Um, and we'll get into the ARM stuff later. But I thought that was pretty crazy. Like we've seen, these public cloud has clearly taken off. People are moving more and more workloads, and that means you can kind of do these cool things with how you carve out resources. So rather than having a GPU per compute and hoping
Mm-hmm.
that it gets utilized, you can move your GPUs into the network and like have servers that essentially just have stacks of GPUs and do things like RDMA, allowing you to
Yep.
access those GPUs across the network. So I could see where the network is important. I could see how
Yeah.
wanting to have control over that piece is certainly relevant for NVIDIA. And that's the only real thing I could figure out when I was trying to figure out
But do you think?
motivations for the acquisition.
But do you think it's like that they want to? First of all, do they? Maybe you can educate me on this. Do they offer? Do they have their own data center themselves? Will they offer AI like services, let's say, or like
Not that I could see.
the ability to run AI functions on their own data center, which is obviously powered by all their own equipment?
I
Okay,
don't
so
think
this
so.
this is really a strictly like sell to like web scalers and or others who want to have their own. I mean, web scalers who are trying to offer any sort of AI services, be able to run AI functions on their in their data centers. Or I guess, is there a market for like smaller folks to not leverage public cloud for this and run their own in-house AI infrastructure?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, NVIDIA is certainly not trying to block that, right? I think there's an infrastructure problem. I mean, if you look at like big universities, ones that kind of have computer scientist divisions,
Yeah.
and they have a bunch of AI workload. I think you'll see most of the highest performing HPC workloads are not run in public cloud, right? They're going to be run in these supercomputers that are often these very secretive data centers. So yeah, I think from that go-to-market perspective, there's no real conflicts. NVIDIA kind of will let anyone buy their GPUs and run whatever
Mhm.
workloads they want. I think you need a certain skill set to onboard AI in general,
Yeah.
which is probably not that many people or that many customers. So main uses I'm suspecting is the growth in public cloud is, if I
But
were to
then
guess. Again.
but then in that case, why does the network become that important to them? It's not something they own even today. If you think about, maybe I guess they want to they want to optimize their architecture to work with their NICs, like their NICs. But when it comes down to their TORs, is it really do you think they have a play where they're going to try and make some optimizations, some value add, where if you use an NVIDIA stack, it actually pushes the web scalers to actually to use Mellanox based TORs in their data centers? I mean, like if you think about it, like a web scaler's not making a TOR decision based on what they're doing in the server, at least that I know of, most of the time. But here you would have a case where is NVIDIA trying to push that kind of like a stack where they say, here, you're just going to buy our racks, and they're going to include a top of rack switch, which has some built-in optimized functionality so that you can do this cross rack GPU AI enabled functions,
Yeah, I mean,
or they're trying to hit a market which isn't the web scalers, and they're trying to say to the smaller folks, hey, we'll just sell you an integrated rack. Like you can just buy, like in the same way that AWS and Google with Anthos is trying to push their integrated racks for, a public cloud on-prem type of functionality. They would do the same thing with AI, where NVIDIA would say, here, buy our rack from us. And it includes networking and all of our hardware.
Yeah, I mean, the reason and you're doing the same thing, going straight to the Tor, right? I think most of this energy here, at least I would have suspected before the Cumulus acquisition, and the Cumulus acquisition kind of maybe tips their hand a little bit.
Yeah.
But I would have thought would have been more on the NIC side. And
Exactly.
absolutely, there's a lot of relevance with having super high performance workloads that need super low I/O or super high low latency I/O to memory or to DMA stuff into a GPU or something. That NIC performing that RDMA offload is massively important, right? Now, why they thought they needed to acquire Mellanox and couldn't just rely on Mellanox to innovate in this space anyway, I mean, is a good question. It's not like Mellanox is going to stop selling these NICs to, customers that have AMD workloads, for example, right? That's not happening. So any innovations they do are likely going to be accessible to a wider market. Maybe they think with a vertically integrated stack they can make things work nicer. I mean, when
That's
you
what I'm
get
thinking, and that's the value add they'll provide is you could buy our GPUs or whatever our AI GPUs are, but if you want realization of the best functionality and performance, then you'll buy our GPUs and our optimized NICs in order for you to do these specialized RDMA type functionality.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, right? I definitely wouldn't put it past them. Clearly, their acquisition is motivated by high performance computing, right? And so I mean, if you just look at the acquisitions, they think that with a vertically integrated stack, they are going to have some kind of edge. I mean, again, they have 97% of the market share right now, so this could just be a trying to stay on top thing. I don't know. That's a huge market share when it comes to these kind of workloads. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, the other thing that is kind of interesting is it wasn't really a space NVIDIA was playing in either. So this could just be extending kind of their technical portfolio, so to speak. It's not like NVIDIA had NICs, unlike Intel, for example. That's why the Intel Mellanox rumors didn't really make sense unless the whole barefoot thing was being thrown away. I mean, we don't think that's happening, at least not yet. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's hard to say. Like we're just we're in pure speculation land here, and we haven't really seen any outcome from this yet, right? Like it's still early days. We haven't seen anything from this acquisition that could have or could not have happened without the acquisition happening. So it's tough to say. What is interesting, actually, just going back to the chips on Spectrum 3, what they announced earlier this year. So this 12.8T, of course. So this is competing with like a Tomahawk 3 style chip now. It's a chiplet design. It's a chiplet design. It's not like your monolithic attach your SerDes directly into your chip. So they've kind of got multiple chips now. One of them terminating the analog, terminating the SerDes, and then a separate digital chip. Now both chips are 16 nanometers, so there was no improvement on either side. But like what we've seen with the AMD and their chiplet design is, as soon as you break up your functionality, you're removing the decouplement of kind of innovation, right? Like in theory, you can evolve a digital chip faster than an analog chip. That's what we've seen with SerDes and things like that. Yep. So that could be the big change, because Spectrum 3 was still based on its 50 gig PAM4. So they actually didn't get any major upgrades at a chip level from this, other than breaking up the architecture. They just doubled the number of SerDes. That's actually how they got the throughput, is they allowed you to attach 256. Now I know Tofino 2 also has gone to a chiplet design. As far as I know, Tomahawk is not a chiplet design.
Is that because you think they hit some sort of limits where they had to start doing that? Or I guess not if Tomahawk hasn't. There's obviously something there, but
yeah,
I wonder what the design decision is for that.
They're beholden to that kind of analog chip is the problem. So they could make their chip go really fast, but if you're still only able to attach, I don't know, 128 50 gig SerDes into it, what does it matter, right?
Yeah, right.
I think that was the main motivation. If you break it up, in theory, you decouple the evolution path of the two chips, or you can have multiple chips, which we've seen AMD do. So, I mean, the design makes sense. It's also the design that other vendors have taken. Some of them have had it for a long time, actually. But yeah, Broadcom, as far as I can tell, and I could be wrong, I didn't do much research on Tomahawk 4 before we came into this. As far as I can tell, they're not chiplet designs. They're just monolithic designs. and they're relying on being able to attach A, more SerDes into these platforms, or B, going to like 100 gig. I think it's called PAM8. I need to look at what the next level of modulation is. We need some more PAM over here.
All the PAMs.
Yeah. All right. I don't want us to get too stuck on Mellanox, but again, I think most of it is motivated by data center, high performance computing, wanting to own more of that stack, and like you alluded to, right? I think that we'll see some benefits of having a proper vertically integrated solution from NVIDIA. Let's move on to NVIDIA plus Cumulus, unless you have any closing thoughts.
Nope, I don't. I certainly do not. Cumulus.
All right.
That's an interesting one too. Seems kind of strange, but then it ties back to like the whole Mellanox thing, where, I mean, the Mellanox driver, we could have said was the NICs, like we discussed, but the Cumulus acquisition tends to tie itself to switching to begin with, and maybe some NIC stuff. I don't know, but.
Yeah, and there's some real complications with this acquisition, right? As I'm sure we'll get into in a second. But I couldn't find what this was disclosed for. I don't know if it was ever disclosed what the actual acquisition was for. Feel free to Google while I'm talking.
I shall Google while you're talking.
But yeah, I mean, there was comments around NetQ. There was comments around NetQ is Cumulus's kind of orchestration automation platform that sits on top of their switches. To innovate and optimize across the entire networking stack is the quote that came out of the NVIDIA CEO, I think. Okay. So based on that, I think there's a few things that could potentially happen. One is NICs today are they're not really managed properly. I don't think Mellanox has a good solution for actually managing the NICs. They kind of rely on others to create those solutions or to integrate them into the server management, right? Which is what we've typically seen up until today. They're not really treated as their own endpoints.
Right.
And I mean, one thing we didn't discuss with Mellanox, because we didn't really cover the NICs, is this evolution to smart NICs, right?
Yeah.
And that term is super overused. But by my definition, a smart NIC is a SOC style design where you have an ASIC or an FPGA or some other way to process packets, and you have some like a CPU complex, right? You have like some actual cores and some memory and probably some storage sitting down on the NIC as its own self-contained unit of compute. So I think if you think about that in the context of Cumulus, maybe it makes sense, because these now need to, like, they can't really be managed as part of the server, right? They've probably got their own management stack. They've probably got their own management interface. It does complicate things. So maybe this is them kind of build like an automation and management story around smart NICs. Because the one thing, the reason, because, again, you and I come from kind of data center backgrounds. So what I read into this initially was, they're looking for an OS, like an actual like full-fledged OS to run on top of Spectrum, and then they've got like a self-contained solution, right? But Mellanox has their own OS. Like, they don't really push it too much. As we know, Sonic also runs on Spectrum chips, so they just as easily could have gone down the Sonic route and branched it and created some internal branch that they developed. There were other options here if you just look at the switch play, I guess is what I'm saying. So I think it has something to do with the smart NICs. That's Bruce's speculation for the day.
Yeah. By the way, just sidebar. The details have not been disclosed.
All right.
I could not find anything. I mean, I only spent a couple minutes, as you could tell, but I didn't find anything.
Yeah, if you can't find it
anyway,
in a couple minutes, it ain't worth
finding.
You
think it's okay? So coming back to that, what you just said, because I clearly was not listening to the very beginning and what you rambled on about. But okay, so you think it's a NIC management play, or
yeah, that's my.
And did you say sorry that Cumulus already had something in the pipeline or existing for smart NIC management?
Not that I could find.
So you think that they may have had some ideas, some early development that maybe NVIDIA was privy to based on the Mellanox acquisition, or just general ideas that they could run something like that on a NIC?
Well, I think if you look at these NICs, right, they're either like Intel Atom or ARM-based designs. More on ARM later, guys. They're so these are both kind of instruction sets that lend themselves. I mean, granted, Cumulus, I think today is only x86, and I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. But all they really would have been looking for, I think, is someone who was maybe in a little bit of trouble. Again, there was no disclosed price for this, but I think the industry was speculating that Cumulus was in a little bit of trouble. The idea that they supported hundreds of Switch platforms has never really played out to be reality. Right. So they probably thought that it was like a little bit of a bargain. I'm sure lots of people at Cumulus, or now NVIDIA, are slapping me for that, but at least that was my perspective going into it, that Cumulus was definitely a disruptor, but once the disruption kind of wore off and the hype died down, and it came to delivering, them just saying, well, we support 100 switches, wasn't really working, right? So I think maybe that was part of it, but really I think all they were looking for was a Linux-based NOS, and there are a bunch that fit into that category. A lot of them are being built by vendors, as you know, so those are not ripe for acquisition unless you're wanting to pay for more than just the NOS. Yeah. And if you look at just NOSes, I know there was Pluribus was another NOS that was floated around. If you look at like Big Switch, getting acquired by Arista, I think that was late last year, maybe early this year. So there actually weren't that many left on the market that were kind of ripe for the pickings. I think there was no solution.
Commercial ones, because I mean, you said Sonic would have been an option if they wanted to go down the route of open source.
Yeah.
Either branching and having their own version of it, or even contributing back to open source. But I guess that wasn't the route they wanted to take.
Which is interesting, right? I mean, maybe, again, it's them wanting to control everything, because that's kind of their mode of operation up until this point, it seems. But yeah, I mean, if I were to choose between Cumulus or Sonic, I know which one I would pick. And it's not the one NVIDIA picked.
But why, again, why? Then it comes down to, why do they care so much about the network? And
well, I think
more specifically
the automation
controlling
story. The automation story with the SmartNIC is the only thing I can think of, right? Because I mean, we're focusing on the NOS because that was kind of Cumulus's main product, but they also had a management platform that went along with this. Sonic does not have a management platform,
right?
Because that's the beauty of open source, right? You just focus on the one thing you want to work on and let someone else work on the other thing. Now, there are solutions out there. I think of course, we know Microsoft for sure has some kind of management infrastructure for driving Sonic. On Spectrum too, they have that deployed. So I think maybe they get both the switch play for running this on SmartNICs, and they also get the automation platform, if I were to try and justify the reasoning.
But I feel like the management platform is such a high level thing. I mean, as in, like, if you're NVIDIA and you're trying to optimize you're trying to make use of these SmartNICs to optimize some of these workloads or some of this computational power between your GPUs and whatever you're trying to do with it on the NIC to GPU interaction, and then over the network to other GPUs and other NICs, that doesn't require that requires a pretty low level management.
Sure.
But
if you control the NOS, right, you can just abstract that. Like, let's say it's a bunch of queues that you need to expose and guarantee. But, I mean, there's definitely low-level constructs. I would debate that even Cumulus doesn't deal with low-level constructs, right?
Right. So here they want to manage higher-level constructs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. But what would those be that they would care about?
I mean, it's a good question. If you just look at where the industry is heading, we have NVMe over Fabric coming. We have all the various mechanisms for delivering kind of reliable connectivity across a network, whether it be like Rocky V2 or iWarp or NVMe over TCP. I mean, there's a bunch out there. I actually don't know who's going to win. I'm not a storage guy, so I'm not gonna pretend to know. But if we look at it, and I mean, it's going to be some kind of NVMe style storage. Getting rid of that serialization towards your drives is kind of a pretty massive evolution of how we drive storage. How this affects NVIDIA, I mean, if you look at those are really about accessing memory over a network, and that is kind of NVIDIA's main use case for AI and kind of centralizing some of these high performance compute clusters.
Yeah.
So again, we're drawing conclusions from what we know, but that would be my 2 cents. That there's the whole SmartNIC play. For sure, we know that Mellanox is investing a lot in that space. In theory, Cumulus could run on that SmartNIC. There's no reason they'd have to cross compile for ARM, sort out their little Indians from their big Indians. They'd have to do that, but but it could in theory work. And then they have kind of the management platform to go along with it, if I were to guess.
And so what is NVIDIA selling then?
GPUs.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
No, I mean, I think they're just trying to capitalize on the market share they have, right? If they continue to improve in this space, there's no real motivator for people to move away from them outside of the outrageous costs of GPUs these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just hedging or kind of secure their foothold in the market. And it's a significant foothold, right?
I'd say so.
All right. Any more closing thoughts on Cumulus? Otherwise, I think we should move on.
No, I still find it's still a mystery to some extent. I mean, I could see what you're
agree.
describing, the
I agree.
potentially running on the SmartNIC. Then they want a management system that's a higher level abstraction. I don't know. I still find it a bit confusing to some extent as to what the goal is there. I mean, other than I don't think they're in the business of selling switches. I don't think that's their. I mean, unless they're going to start releasing NVIDIA switches, which will be Mellanox plus Cumulus, and that's going to be a business they want to enter. I mean, it just seems like it's sort of side tangent to their core business.
I mean, yeah, I agree.
So
like they could have lifted it to Mellanox, right? They could have lifted it to Mellanox and just went along. Like they didn't need to pay $7 billion for this, so there has to be some kind of
something
value
we're
add
missing.
they think they're getting.
Yeah.
I mean,
hopefully they make some crazy once all this so all these deals close this year. They make some huge announcement that's going to be like, oh, that's what you're doing.
Bam! There's actually like a fourth acquisition they're going to close by the end of the year. That's going to make them all line up.
Yeah. So then we move on to ARM.
Yeah.
ARM is a huge deal.
Massive. Absolutely massive. I think it was the biggest semiconductor acquisition period.
Yeah.
Now, what is interesting is that the business models are entirely different. So I think it's worth us giving like a little bit of a brain dump on ARM, who they are, what they do, that kind of thing. It doesn't make too much sense in the context of the deal, other than there's not too much overlap. So that's again another good sign here. But some specifics on the deal: $40 billion split up amongst there was some stock that was exchanged, 12 billion in cash, 5 billion if they hit certain targets. And there was also some chump change, like a couple of billion thrown to ARM employees in the form of equity. And this is about 31 billion euros for those of you not listening in the US. So yeah, the largest semiconductor deal by dollar value ever.
It's crazy. It's huge.
40 billion. Like after coming off the the Mellanox and then Cumulus. We don't know how much they pay for Cumulus, but I mean, NVIDIA's on a roll.
Yeah,
and using a bunch of that equity they built up with the stock price going up. So,
and also, if you think about, we just finished saying that the acquisition of Mellanox was just under 7 billion. All of it was cash. It left NVIDIA with like 500 million or something like that in cash.
The stores were depleted.
And they've now brought that back up to at least 12 billion because they just spent 12 billion cash, right? So, and most likely more. I haven't looked at what their finances look like. So in that period of time, that's massive. I mean, they've replenished those coffins very quickly.
Yeah, and I could see why they think paying a lot of money for ARM is a good idea. So ARM was acquired by SoftBank. I think it was back in 2016. And I think it was for, let me look at my notes here, 32 billion. Mm-hmm. And SoftBank is still maintaining a stake. They're maintaining a 10% stake.
Right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that was only 4 years ago. And on the back of that, ARM has, they've broken into a few additional markets, right? Like there's some data center stuff happening with ARM now. They have this big core. I didn't do much reading into it, but by the sounds of it, it's a bunch of ARM processes.
Okay.
Or I should say cores. So, wait, yeah. Automotive and IoT and now NPU. I saw that in an article I was reading. I don't know if ARM actually building any network processors. Maybe they are. I don't know.
Maybe they are. Maybe with Mellanox. Maybe there's something going on there.
Maybe it's going to be Spectrum 4, and it's all based on ARM.
It's ARM based.
Yeah. So
what does that bring to NVIDIA now? So they have ARM. right? They purchased ARM. It's all theirs.
Yep.
What does this bring to their offering?
So if I were to, again, speculation land,
Yeah.
ARM obviously is very, very good at high efficiency. So in terms of watt per compute cycle, I think they're very good compared to x86. Of course, they do use the reduced instruction set, whereas like x86 uses a complex instruction set. So very, very efficient. If I were to guess, NVIDIA is doubling down on the two kind of market drivers for AI. One is, of course, data centers. We need like HPC clusters, going back to that. Yeah. The other is we're actually doing a lot more AI in smaller devices. Like if you would have saw Apple's, I think it was even iOS 14. No, it's the iPad. It was the iPad Air announcement they did last week. They have like a ML cores on their iPads now, right? And they're doing fairly simple things, like a lot of augmented reality stuff. But there's genuine AI computation that is happening on these smaller devices.
This is NVIDIA trying to push into more devices. So instead of being tied to their GPU and data center, they're trying to move into. I think it could be. I also think it's also possible that what they're trying to do is they'll build purpose-built computers, which will have ARM processors as a CPU based, and then they'll have their GPUs and then their NICs, and then that'll be
taking over the world.
Yeah, so like basically instead of building a server which will run like an Intel or AMD processor, and running an NVIDIA GPU and potentially an NVIDIA NIC or an Intel NIC, and then they'll just have they'll be able to build a purpose-built AI server, like purpose-built for AI, and it may be cluster of servers all connected through an NVIDIA fabric, which is optimized to do all this. So it could be, I guess it could be both. It could be they're trying to push into more devices, IoT, more AI and ML pushed to the edge to all the little devices, to more than just servers, and also potentially, back into their own, be able to provide a one solution fits all AI.
I wonder if that fourth acquisition is going to be like Equinix or something, and we're going to be like, aha!
And then they're going to build their own data centers, and then they're basically going to say, hey, you can just run your shit on our data centers. That'd be good, actually. That'd be cool. That'd be, hey, Google, what's up?
That would be kind of cool.
You guys are like the whole AI public cloud, big players.
Yeah. So another few anecdotes before we move on. So NVIDIA actually took over Intel this year as being the most valuable chip maker. I think it was in July of this year. So, Intel's held that spot for a long time. Yeah. I think we mentioned it earlier, their revenue from data center workloads actually overtook their gaming workloads in, I think it was the second quarter or third quarter. Yeah, second quarter of this year, which was around 1.75 billion. So clearly this going after this whole HPC, I think NVIDIA is really trying to reposition, or maybe they were already positioned this way, I don't know, as kind of like the AI ML company from a hardware perspective. Because no one else really has tried to go after that market. Intel's mainly focused on general purpose, right? AMD is, again, focusing on general purpose, high core counts, chiplet design. They have some GPUs. I think they have their new RDNA 2 architecture. I don't think it's been announced yet. But soon. Yeah. So maybe AMD is trying to get into this market as well. But yeah, I mean, NVIDIA has kind of pivoted from we just make GPUs for gamers to we make GPUs for a much wider market,
including the whole like
rendering and like video.
But even like self-driving cars, right? Wasn't Tesla using NVIDIA?
I think they were, and one of the first. Yep. So yeah, they've kind of moved on to this whole we're gonna supply hardware for AI, and I guess the next step beyond that is the hardware software mix. Building a solution. Going back to ARM though, there's a few concerns here, right? One is ARM doesn't actually make CPUs. I mean, neither does NVIDIA when you really think about it. They contract with TSMC or Samsung. But ARM don't even do the contracting bit. Like they don't actually make their chips at all. It's all open license. If you have enough money, you can take one of their designs and customize it for whatever you see fit, and then you kind of have your own product, right? So
Yep.
how does this fit in, do you think, with the NVIDIA's current business model of we actually make and sell the chip?
I don't know. I mean, other than they'll just start integrating, they'll make their own ARM chips, is what I'm thinking. They'll
Yeah.
have NVIDIA ARM chips. And
Yeah.
then why
And
they
how's
needed
it
to
gonna
buy ARM for that, I don't know, because they could have just done that without buying
Yeah.
ARM, right?
Yeah.
Unless they, I mean, like you said, they have some. I think they'll start making their own ARM based chips, but I don't know where they're gonna go. Like, is that going to be in like I said, purpose built servers or HPC, or is it going to be tied to some automotive markets or other market? I'm saying automotive, but other kind of like smaller edge devices that are doing some sort of, that require some sort of ARM processors to go along with their AI processors. I don't know. No idea.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of customers out there, like ARM customers today, that are buying licenses, and there's a lot, right? Pretty much every big tech company you've heard of that ships a device probably has a license from ARM to put an ARM CPU in that device. So,
but the concern for them now, though, is that NVIDIA can make their own ARM chip. ARM wasn't making their own chips before, right? So the fact you had all these different people making their own ARM chips and maybe changing some things and whatnot, it was fine. But now it's in the hands of someone who does make their own chips. And it's whether now NVIDIA is going to have an edge in ARM chips. So they're going to start manufacturing their ARM chips. They're going to start manufacturing, obviously, the latest and greatest and most optimized ARM chips because they own ARM, and then leave everybody else to be later to the market.
Yeah. You get designs like a quarter or two after NVIDIA did them, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Right?
So NVIDIA gets, first dibs at all the manufacturing of ARM chips for a given market.
Yeah, so I think if you're an ARM customer today, you're a little nervous, right? Because I mean, for one, what if they just like axed that whole licensing business? I mean, I don't think they would. They make way.
No way.
It's way too much money.
But
yeah, the massive conflict of interest is apparent, right? I mean, you don't need to be like a detailed analyst to be like,
Yeah, exactly.
This is a little off. And I'm wondering, because there's actually some competitors to ARM still based on RISC, based on the reduced instruction set. RISC V, and I'll admit I didn't do a lot of research, and if you're one of the people at Berkeley working on this, please forgive me, but there is an open source implementation of a RISC-based processor called RISC V. And again, it's the design, right? They're not actually manufacturing the chip. I'm wondering, it's not as feature-rich as ARM today. Like they're decent ways behind as far as I could tell. But this might push like a lot of people to consider them as an alternative to ARM now that it's owned by NVIDIA.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah. So the other point I wanted to talk about, because we already talked about market domination and all that kind of stuff. ARM ARM chips powered 90% of smartphones today.
That's so crazy, dude.
9 out of 10.
NVIDIA is going to have 97% of the AI GPU market share and 90+% of the mobile phones. Smartphones.
Yeah. I mean, that's just nutty, right?
Yeah.
Let's all praise our new overlords, NVIDIA.
And they started to make, I mean, who was making specialized server CPUs ARM based? There's somebody was
I think someone in China, I want to say.
Yeah, maybe.
But that does bring us to our next point pretty nicely, unless you remember who it is. China. So NVIDIA is a US-based company, right? They're based out of California. ARM is actually headquartered out of the UK.
Yep.
And I think they, like in the acquisition, they said they're still going to continue to be headquartered out of the UK. I did a little bit of research on, let me see if I can get this right, CFIUS, which is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States.
Okay. First of all, quick pause. Clearly, you've done a lot of research on this.
CFIUS. I mean, I read one article. I read one article.
Go ahead.
I mean, it was a very rich article in terms of information. We'll need to give some credits out, but yeah, this is all one article. So the general fear is that, let's say you're a Chinese manufacturer building ARM chips, and it's no secret that we have a little bit of a trade war going on between the US and China. We've seen the US government take shots at things like TikTok and WeChat, and There was actually a lot of investment in China. I know this based on speaking to some of our customers in China, to move away from general purpose like x86 Intel chips in their data centers.
Okay.
And they were moving to ARM, and that was mainly because Intel, or x86 in general, was manufactured out of the United States, and they were worried about, supply chain and production issues if that trade war were to further escalate, right, and actually start affecting sales of these processors into China. NVIDIA is a U.S. company.
Yeah, exactly. Now what do they do?
I don't know. Power PC, man. Wait, no, that's IBM, right? I think that's a U.S. company too. U.S. owns
I'm sure
like
they have their own ARM-like architecture, or x86-like architecture, heavily inspired by.
Yeah. You could be right.
You could very right. Innovative, but totally inspired by.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think this does not bode well for China, right? And we haven't seen any sign that the trade war is gonna escalate, other than all the recent escalations of the trade war. But
no signs whatsoever.
None. So I did, last comment from my notes, I did find a couple of comments from, and this wasn't in the same thread, from two of the ARM co-founders. I don't know how many co-founders there were. Like, these guys could be small peas in a pod, or they could be the guys. Again, didn't do enough research. But they weren't too happy with the deal. They felt the whole concern with ARM predominantly licensing its chip designs to actually manufacture, like being acquired by someone who makes chips, was going to create a huge conflict of interest. So clearly the guys in the know weren't super happy with this. Yeah. And that's it from my notes. So we don't need to, I can stop glancing over to the right-hand side. But yeah, so, I mean, it's super, super interesting. I think if you imagine that NVIDIA can push more ML and AI to the edge, like, let's say your smartphone was able to do more and more and more, and NVIDIA was able to reap the benefits of that, and maybe synergize it with, some HPC cluster. And I mean, I'm getting some kind of flashbacks to Silicon Valley, where everyone's phones are just part of the botnet, Like, that's where my head is going.
That could be. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some synergies there between ARM architecture and some of the stuff they're doing on the AI ML front, and pushing it out to the edge and being, I mean, I'm sure it's there. I don't know enough about it. And we come back to us not knowing enough about this and talking about things we don't know enough about.
Hey, man, we did our research. That's the main thing. That's all anyone could ask. I'm sure some people
you
learned
did your
some
research.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. NVIDIA was kind of on the warpath with acquisition, so we thought we should at least speak about it, especially as it crosses into our area being data center.
Yeah, I mean, I found it interesting. The ARM part was obviously a big news and interesting, but to me, it's figuring out what they're trying to do on the networking side of things, like with the whole Mellanox Cumulus and what their plan is there. I'm hoping that there'll be some clarity over the next year about what they plan to do that, because everything they're doing right now still, like, if you look at, Cumulus seems to operate just like they were operating before. I mean, okay, actually, there's one thing we didn't touch about, and that is Cumulus's lack of support for Broadcom chips.
Oh, how did we miss that?
Yeah,
that should have been on my notes. That is, it should have been in
your notes. But let's come back to that really quickly. But so if you look at, other than that one announcement, they're operating just as they were operating before, right? As far as I can tell. Mellanox, same thing. I don't see any differences in they're still selling NICs and selling NPUs. Like, that seems like I haven't seen any synergies yet. I haven't seen NVIDIA announce something that is a clear tie-in between their core business model with GPUs to networking. I haven't seen that connection yet. So I'm hoping the next year there's some big announcement about some connection there that's a lot more obvious than what it's been so far. But yeah, so let's go back to that, which makes sense if you think about it, but was not expected.
I mean, it does.
I mean, I guess it was expected.
I wonder if they expected it. I wonder if they expected it.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, for those of you who missed it, there was I think it was just a tweet, right? I actually didn't see anything official. I just saw like a tweet that came out. I can't even remember who it was from.
Insider. It's like insider information. I'm not even
insider
sure.
information.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure those affected customers of Cumulus were probably made aware of this, which is why it's getting out maybe. But I haven't seen a public announcement from Cumulus saying so. But go ahead.
Yeah, and the announcement was that Cumulus's access to the Broadcom SDK was going to be discontinued. And I think they would still maintain support for existing Broadcom chips up until the coming release of Cumulus Linux, right? I think that is what I remember reading. So what this means is, we're kind of on that cusp where Broadcom has multiple new chips coming out, right? We have now not all of them have used Cumulus in the past, so let's just forget the ones that haven't run on Cumulus or Cumulus hasn't run on. So that would be the new ones are Trident 4 and Tomahawk 4.
Right.
So Trident 4 being 12.8 tera, and Tomahawk 4 being 25.6 tera. Yeah. And these are not half duplex numbers. These are real full duplex numbers. These are pretty crazy dense chips. Yeah. Cumulus now has no path to running on them, so they have to look out elsewhere. And I don't know for sure. Like, none of the stuff is public, but I would argue that the majority of Cumulus customers today either have Spectrum, in which case no problem, or Broadcom. Like, surely.
Broadcom's such a huge player. I can't imagine that they're not running on Broadcom.
Yeah.
We probably
should have gone through the list of platforms and checked.
Isn't there some sort of like open source Broadcom SDK initiative that obviously you wouldn't get as much or as fast of an update than you would, but
Psi in theory is that, right? I mean, it's not really open source.
There was something
Broadcom
else.
Don't open the source code for their Psi.
Damn, I wish I had spent time on this.
There
was something else, and it doesn't matter. Ignore it. I thought there was something that could bridge the gap. I thought I read somewhere there was something that could bridge the gap, but would be delayed, obviously, not exactly as fully featured as what you would get from Broadcom from an SDK perspective. That Cumulus could leverage, but I can't imagine they're going to. Like, I don't see. I mean, they've obviously been told, that's it.
You're cut off. You've drunk too much. Okay, I think we lost Erwin there for a second.
No. Are we back?
We're back. All right.
Hey, what happened there?
You kind of, I don't know. You kind of like you drifted off. Your camera froze, and then your voice cut off eventually. But yeah, so I think I don't know. This is going to hurt Cumulus a lot, I think. Now, probably Mellanox. I mean, not Mellanox. NVIDIA don't care too much. But I would argue that.
But again, it depends what they're trying to do with it. Like, if they're trying to operate Cumulus as it was operating, that's a big blow because Broadcom is a huge, is the incumbent in the space. So if the goal was to do some integrations but maintain the current business model, then that hurts. I don't think that's the case. I think NVIDIA had other plans, which I'm sure Broadcom was privy to some extent or could extrapolate, which is why they've decided to do this. But yeah, this is why I'm like waiting for some announcement from NVIDIA about
the master plan, right?
Some offering that's going to connect all the dots in some sort of clarity, which I have not had yet.
Yeah, I mean, you might be waiting a little while. We know how slowly this industry moves.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I maybe Cumulus can still build on top of Psi. Like, I think you don't need a license to use Psi, as far as I know, because it's a maybe you do. Right. I actually I don't know. We could probably look into that, but
don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen other OSs try and adopt Psi within their stacks as well. Now, of course, Psi is predominantly built for Sonic, but yeah, I don't know. It could leave a lot of Cumulus customers high and dry, right? Which wouldn't be fun. I mean, I'm assuming they don't have to upgrade, so you could just keep running whatever you're running.
I wonder who are the Cumulus's big customers, like big consumers.
Well, I don't know. There's the public cloud provider, the big one.
But were they actually using Cumulus proper?
Not really. So as far as I know, and without being able to source this information, there was a lump sum payment, and they no longer had to pay licensing ever again. And now they own the OS, and they've iterated on it since then.
So but do you think that this affects them? Like, do you think they were using? I assume it wouldn't affect them actually.
I don't think it would. Yeah, I think they branched from main Cumulus a long time ago.
Yeah. I mean, they would be too big. It would be too big of a deal for Broadcom to screw them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And they would never
Those
do
cloud
that.
titans, as they call
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
They buy a lot of chips. They buy a lot of platforms.
Yeah,
And
so
they're
they
like
would-
in massive growth from COVID. So, that spend has only ramped. It hasn't really slowed down.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. I don't have
Oh,
anything
well.
further to talk about on NVIDIA.
Me neither.
Again,
and I gotta go
world,
for a
world
run.
domination. Runs are
It's,
important.
it's
Stay
running day
healthy.
today. It's running day. In 30 minutes from now, I shall go and attempt to run.
Attempt. I like it. All right, guys. I guess we'll close off here then. Thanks for
Yep,
listening. If
sounds
you
good.
hung with us till the end.
Have a good one.
All right. Cheers. Hey everyone. Thanks again for tuning in. As always, please do let us know any feedback or criticisms you may have. We can be reached on Twitter, YouTube, or our website, ntwr.kn, where you'll find this episode and many others posted. For those of you on YouTube, if you liked the episode, please hit that thumbs up button. And if you didn't like the episode, feel free to hit the thumbs down button twice. On a side note, you know those cliche, these are our opinions and not that of our employer statements you hear all the time? Yeah, we unfortunately have to make one of those. The benefits of working in the industry we want to publicly have an opinion about. We've done our best to remove bias, but we're only human and we make mistakes just like you. Thanks again. We'll see you in the next one.